My mom's boyfriend threatened to destroy my life if I didn't hand over my paycheck, so I spent 3 weeks setting a trap that ended with him in handcuffs in our living room. The glass hit the wall at 10:17 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone right after, the way you do when something happens and your brain wants a timestamp to prove it was real. The water was still running down the drywall in thin silver lines. Shards of it had gone everywhere, onto the counter, across the linoleum, into the corner behind the trash can. One piece had slid under the stove. Marcus stood in the middle of the kitchen with both fists balled at his sides and said, "I'm not asking again." I still had my work apron on. I'd clocked out 40 minutes ago. My feet were aching in that specific way they do after a full shift. Not pain exactly, more like a low, grinding pressure that settles into your arches and doesn't let go until you've been off them for an hour. I hadn't even taken my jacket off yet. I said, "No." He stepped closer. I could smell the beer on him from 3 feet away. His eyes had that flat, overlit quality that I'd come to recognize over the past several months. The look he got when the drinking had moved past relaxed and into something else, something that needed a target. "You think I'm playing with you?" he said. "Hand it over. All of it." He meant my paycheck. I'd cashed it that afternoon. $340, 2 weeks of closing shifts at the restaurant where I'd worked since I was 16. I was 18 now. The money was in my jacket pocket, in an envelope with the bank's logo on it. I said no again. That was when he grabbed the glass off the counter, my glass, the one I'd poured before I walked in the door, and threw it at the wall. My mom came in from the hallway 2 seconds later. She looked at the wall. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. And she said the thing that I still can't fully explain, even now, even after everything. Apologize to him. Not to him. Not for throwing it. Not what happened. What did you do? She said, apologize to him. Like I was the one who'd shattered something. Marcus stood there with his arms crossed, smirking. He smirked the whole time I said sorry. That was the night I stopped being passive. That was the night I started paying attention. I need to explain what our house was like before Marcus arrived, because the contrast matters. My name is Jade. I was 18 at the time this happened. I had a younger brother named Danny, who was 12. Our mom, her name is Renee, had been raising us alone for about 7 years, since our dad left when I was 11. The leaving wasn't dramatic. No fight, no blow up. He just got quieter and quieter until one day he wasn't there. He moved to Riverside, got an apartment, remarried. We saw him on holidays. It wasn't hostile. It was just absence. Mom worked as a dental office manager in Glendale. She made decent money. Not comfortable money, but stable. She owned the house, a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that had gotten nicer since she bought it. She'd done that herself. The mortgage, the repairs, the years of property tax. She was competent and steady in 100 practical ways. What she wasn't was emotionally guarded. That was always her vulnerability. She wanted someone. Not desperately, not visibly. She wasn't the kind of woman who talked about it, but she lit up differently when there was a man in her life. Her whole rhythm changed. She cooked more. She laughed differently. She got softer in a way that, as a kid, I'd found comforting, but that I'd come to understand as a kind of opening in her armor. Marcus came through that opening. She met him at a church fundraiser in October, 2 years before all of this. He was charming in the way that men who've had practice are charming. Easy with compliments, good at listening, the kind of attentive that women who haven't been listened to in a long time read as genuine. He was 44. She was 41. He told her he was in commercial real estate, that his money was tied up in a few long-term investments, that he was between projects. She didn't push. He moved in after 6 months. At first, I thought he was just boring. He watched a lot of television. He had opinions about things he didn't know much about. He took up space in a particular way. His jacket always on the back of the kitchen chair, his shoes always in front of the door, his coffee cup always on the counter right next to the sink but never in it. Small impositions, not worth mentioning. The first time he said something to Danny that bothered me was about 8 months in. We were eating dinner, a Sunday I remember because Mom had made her pot roast, and Danny was telling us about a project he'd done at school, a diorama of a biome. He was proud of it, you could hear it, the way 12-year-olds get proud when they've actually worked hard at something, and it paid off. He was in the middle of explaining the plants he'd chosen, and Marcus put his fork down and said, "Is this going somewhere?" Danny stopped. His face went very still. Mom laughed like it was a joke. She said, "He's just teasing," and handed Marcus the breadbasket. I looked at Danny. He didn't finish his story. He ate the rest of dinner looking at his plate. That was the first one. There were others after that. By the time of the glass incident, Marcus had been living with us for 14 months. In that time, he had told Danny he was stupid 3 separate times that I personally witnessed. He had told him that nobody cared what he thought. He had grabbed his shoulder at the dinner table and told him to be quiet. He had criticized his handwriting, his laugh, the way he chewed, the questions he asked, and every single time, if Mom was in the room, she found a way to explain it away. He's tired. He's stressed. You know how he is. Danny, stop being so sensitive. Danny had started going quiet at home the way I'd gone quiet at 11 when our dad disappeared. I recognized it, the careful stillness, the way he'd read the room before he spoke now, checking for permission. He was 12 years old, and he'd already learned to take up less space. That mattered more to me than anything else. That was why I didn't pack a bag and leave. After the glass night, I called my dad. It was past 11, and he picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd been waiting. I told him what happened. I didn't cry right away. I made it through most of the telling before my voice broke. He said, "Jade, come stay with me. Come tomorrow." I said I couldn't leave Danny. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, what do you need?" I said I needed 3 weeks. He said, "I'll be here." The next next morning, I started watching Marcus the way you watch something you're trying to understand. Not the surface, the underneath. He drove a Ram 1500 that was 2 years old. He wore Carhartt jackets and New Balance sneakers, and a watch that I later learned was a Seiko Prospex, around $300 new. He had nice things, not flashy, but consistent. The kind of spending that assumed money was available, but he never left for work, not once. In 14 months, I had never seen Marcus leave the house before 10 in the morning, never seen him come home tired, never heard him on the phone about anything that sounded like business. He'd mentioned the real estate investments to me twice, vaguely, in the way people mention things they don't want you to ask follow-up questions about. I started paying attention to the mail. Most of it was mom's, bills, catalogs, a dental journal she subscribed to, but Marcus got letters sometimes, from addresses in Orange County, in Sacramento, in Phoenix. He always collected them before mom could see them, which I only noticed because I started watching for it. I found him on Facebook. His profile was mostly private, but his friend list wasn't. I scrolled through it for about 40 minutes before I found her, a woman named Brianna Coles, whose profile picture was her and 2 little girls at what looked like a birthday party. One girl maybe 4, the other maybe 6. Brianna's page was public. Most of it was about her kids, but there were posts going back a couple years that referenced someone, no name, just he or him, in language that I recognized. Posts about being lied to, posts about courts and hearings, posts about waiting for money that never came. I sent her a message. She replied in 20 minutes. We talked for 2 hours. Marcus had done this 4 times. That was the number Brianna gave me, though she said she thought there might be others she didn't know about. He'd done it the same way each time. Charity events, churches, community spaces where single mothers gathered. He'd identify a woman with her own home, her own income, a stability she'd built herself. He'd be attentive and warm, and he'd talk about his investments the way you talk about something boring but real, the way you'd talk about your retirement account. Then he'd move in, stop contributing financially within a few months, begin isolating the woman from people who might notice, and start finding ways to access her assets. With Brianna, it had been a joint account. He'd drained it in 2 transactions, each just under the amount that would trigger an automatic fraud alert. Then he disappeared. Their daughters were 4 and 6 at the time. They were now 7 and 9. He owed Brianna $12,000 in unpaid child support. He'd been hiding from her and from the court for 8 months. She had a private attorney and 2 outstanding enforcement orders and no idea where he was until I messaged her. She asked me if I was sure. If it was him, I described him, gave her the truck's plates, told her what he'd said to me about his name going on the house deed. On that last part, she made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely. She said that was word for word what he'd said to her, and that she'd actually started the paperwork before she found out the account was empty. I gave her our address. I told her to give me 3 weeks. She said she could wait. There were things I needed to do first. I needed Marcus comfortable. I needed him careless. And more importantly, I needed my mom in the room when it happened. She had to see it herself. I'd learned enough in 18 years to know that if I just told her what I'd found, she'd find a reason not to believe me. Not because she was stupid, she wasn't, but because some truths are too costly to accept without being cornered by them. I also needed to know what his plan was exactly. The house deed comment had been offhand, drunk. I needed him to say it sober, or close enough to sober to be damning. So I did the thing that felt the most unnatural thing I've ever done. I made peace with him. The week after the glass, I started being cooperative, not groveling. That would have read as suspicious. Just cooperative. I said good morning. I asked about his day. I watched his football games with him for 20 minutes twice that week and made interested noises about the teams. I told mom I thought I'd been too rigid about things. She was so relieved she almost cried. She said she knew I'd come around. Marcus noticed. He got looser around me, more expansive. He started saying things that revealed his thinking about the house, about mom, about their relationship's trajectory. He referred to our finances once, which was a phrase he had no business using. He mentioned, while mom was in the other room, that he had a buddy who'd made things work out right in a divorce situation, which I understood to mean he'd found a way to claim property he hadn't earned. The Thursday of the second week, he told me in the kitchen, while he was opening a beer at 4 in the afternoon, that he thought my mom was a good woman who just needed someone to handle things for her. He said it with complete sincerity, like it was a compliment. I said, "She's lucky to have you." He pointed at me with the beer bottle. "See, that's the right attitude. That's what I'm talking about." By the Friday of the 3rd week, I called Brianna. I said, "Tomorrow night." I told her to bring everything, the court orders, the documentation, whatever she had in paper form. I told her to call Officer Tucker Bentley. She told me she already had a contact at the sheriff's department in Los Angeles County who'd been assigned to her case. She said she'd been waiting for a confirmed address for months, and she'd have her attorney make the call that night. Then I called mom and told her I wanted to cook dinner. Something nice. Make it a real family night. She asked what the occasion was. I said I just wanted things to be better. She said, "Honey, that means everything to me." Friday night, I made Marcus's favorite. I'd learned it by listening. He'd mentioned it twice to mom. Beef stew, the kind with thick gravy, and the potatoes cut into big chunks. I made it from scratch. 4 hours. I kept his beer full all night. I laughed at things that weren't funny. I told him over dinner that I thought he'd been a good influence on our family, and he sat up a little straighter and glanced at my mom with an expression that made my stomach turn. Danny ate quietly. He kept looking at me sideways, like he knew something was different but couldn't place it. After dinner, I sent Danny to his room. I told him I had a movie I wanted to show him later. He didn't question it. He just went. By 9 o'clock, Marcus was drunk and talking. He said he'd been patient. Said he'd waited long enough to see how things were going to go with the deed. He said he'd talked to someone, he didn't say who, about the fastest way to get his name added to a property when you were in a long-term partnership. Said it was cleaner if it happened before any legal complications. Mom frowned. She asked what he meant by legal complications. He waved a hand. Said she was thinking too small. Said once the deed thing was sorted, they'd have real security, real options. She asked again what he meant. He looked at her with an expression I can only describe as fond contempt, the face of someone who has decided the person they're looking at is a useful object. And he said, "Renee, you are so desperate to be loved that you would hand a man anything. That is genuinely adorable. Do you know how easy this has been?" The room went very still. Mom said, "What did you just say?" He laughed. He actually laughed. He said dating lonely single mothers was the easiest thing he'd ever done. Said they were so grateful for the attention that they didn't ask real questions. Said by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late because they'd already made him comfortable. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door. I opened it, and Brianna was standing on our porch in a gray coat with a manila folder pressed flat against her chest. She had dark hair and tired eyes, and the specific posture of someone who has been fighting a bureaucratic war for years and hasn't allowed themselves to stop. Standing next to her was a man in a sheriff's department uniform, badge reading Tucker Bentley in raised letters, hand on his belt. Not aggressive, just present. She looked past me into the living room. Her whole body went rigid. She pointed at Marcus and said, "That's him." I stepped aside. Marcus stood up from the couch, or tried to. His legs buckled. He grabbed the couch arm and got himself upright and stood there looking at the door with the expression of a man who has always, in his deepest understanding of himself, known this moment was coming. Officer Bentley stepped inside and identified himself. Outstanding warrants in Los Angeles County and Sacramento County. $12,400 in unpaid child support. He recited it the way you read a grocery list, methodically, without drama, each item distinct. Marcus said, "There's been a mistake." Nobody responded to that. Brianna walked to the center of our living room. She opened the folder. She took out an 8x10 photograph. Two little girls in Easter dresses, one with her father's eyes, the other with his jawline, and held it up and said, "These are his daughters. The older one is 9. She asked me last month if her dad was dead, because that was the only reason she could think of that he wouldn't come back." Mom was still on the couch. She'd been sitting there since his speech about lonely single mothers. She had one hand flat on her knee, and she was looking at the photo with an expression I didn't have a name for then, and still don't quite now. She asked Marcus, "Do you have children you never told me about?" He looked at the floor. One small nod. Mom made a sound I'd never heard before from her. It came from somewhere deep, not crying exactly, more like something collapsing. She said how. She said it over and over. "How could you lie about that? Not to me. How could you lie about 2 children who needed you?" Danny had come out of his room. He was standing in the hallway in his pajamas, half in shadow, watching. He was shaking, the fine, contained trembling of someone who has been afraid for a long time and is watching the thing they were afraid of finally be named. Officer Bentley asked Marcus to put his hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked. They walked him through our living room and out the front door. He kept turning back to look at Mom. He said he loved her. Said it twice, almost plaintively. The way you say something when you know it won't work, but you're out of other options. Then they put him in the car, and the door closed, and the sound cut off, and our house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 14 months. Brianna stood in our living room with her folder. She looked at my mom for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I'm sorry this happened to you too." She left her card on the coffee table and she walked out. I sat down on the couch next to Mom. We didn't say anything for a while. I thought the hard part was over. I want to be honest about that. I genuinely believed, sitting there in the quiet house with the living room finally feeling like ours again, that the worst of it was behind us. I was wrong. I was wrong in a way that cost us. The first thing was that Marcus made bail. Not immediately. He sat in county for 72 hours, which felt like justice until it didn't. On the third day, Mom's phone rang. The bank. Calling to confirm a withdrawal. She answered it standing in the kitchen. I heard her voice go flat and strange. That tone people get when information is arriving that they aren't ready for. She hung up. She wouldn't look at me. I asked her how much. She said $8,000. She'd wired it that morning while I was at work. He'd called her from county and she'd picked up, and somewhere in that phone call, which she couldn't fully explain to me afterward, could only describe in fragments. His voice, what he said, I don't know why. She'd authorized a wire transfer to cover bail. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she told me. I wasn't angry at her. That's the honest truth, and I want to say it clearly. I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. Because I understood it. Not the logic of it. There was no logic, but the place it came from. The 14 months of being chosen and seen and valued, even if the person doing the choosing had been running a long calculation the whole time. When that's what you have, when that's the thing you've organized your emotional life around, the mind does extraordinary things to protect it, even when it's gone, even when the evidence is standing in your living room in a sheriff's uniform. That $8,000 was the last move Marcus made on her. He made bail and he skipped, left the jurisdiction before his first court date. His attorney withdrew. The warrants compounded. He became someone the courts were looking for instead of someone who showed up. Brianna's attorney filed new enforcement actions. She told me later that the additional charges stemming from the Los Angeles County warrants had made made him harder to hide, that there were now multiple jurisdictions with skin in finding him. She didn't know if it would translate to her daughter's support money. She was trying not to hope too hard. The family reaction was slower and uglier. Mom had a sister, my Aunt Patrice, who'd never liked Marcus but had kept her mouth mostly shut out of respect for Mom's choices. When the story came out, Patrice was at our house within 2 days. She was kind about it, genuinely. She brought food and sat with my mom and didn't say anything like I told you. But some of the other family members, people Mom saw at church, people she'd been friends with for years, handled it the way people sometimes handle someone else's humiliation, by creating a small, careful distance. Not abandonment, just the particular loneliness of being the person that something bad happened to. Mom took 2 weeks off work. She slept late. She ate very little. She watched TV in the evenings with the sound low. She and I had conversations that were real in a way we hadn't had in a year. Conversations where she said things she'd been holding, about the loneliness, about what it felt like to be 41 and raising kids alone and wanting someone to share it with, not defending Marcus, just explaining herself to me. I listened to all of it. Danny changed the most. It was gradual, but it was visible, like watching a houseplant after you move it toward a window. He started talking at dinner again, not cautiously, not with that careful checking the room quality. He just talked. He told us about school. He had opinions about things. He was loud sometimes in the way 12-year-olds are supposed to be loud. Mom started listening to him differently, with her whole attention without deflecting. I watched them together and I felt something unknot in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. 3 weeks after the arrest, I moved to my dad's in Riverside. Not because things were bad at home, they were better, genuinely, but because I was 18 and I needed to start. I'd deferred my community college enrollment for a semester. I undeferred it. I had $340 in an envelope, the paycheck Marcus had tried to take, and my dad had a spare room, and that felt like enough. The night before I left, Danny came and sat on the edge of my bed while I was packing. He didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then he said, "You knew what you were doing the whole time, didn't you?" I said, "Most of it." He said, "How?" I thought about it. I said I'd been paying attention. He nodded at that like it was a more complete answer than it probably was. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently. Whether I should have told my mom sooner, whether showing her Brianna's messages, giving her the information, and letting her make a choice would have been better than engineering the confrontation I set up. The honest answer is, I don't know. What I know is that I'd tried telling her things before, smaller things, earlier things, and she'd found reasons to dismiss them. I needed the truth to be undeniable. I needed it to walk through our front door in person. Whether that was right or just effective is a question I'll probably carry for a long time. What I know for certain is what Marcus was. He wasn't a man in a desperate situation who made bad choices. He wasn't someone who loved imperfectly. He had refined a system over years, across at least 4 households, with at least 4 children now living with the consequences of his absences. He found women who had built stability through their own work and patience, and he presented himself as the thing they'd been missing. He was deliberate about it. He was skilled at it. And the cruelty toward Danny, the grabbing, the silencing, the daily erosions, wasn't incidental to that system. It was part of it. A 12-year-old who's been told often enough that nobody cares what he thinks stops asking questions, stops noticing things. Marcus needed the people in that house to be manageable. He didn't count on me. I think about the water glass sometimes, the way it exploded, the way my mom walked in and told me to apologize. I was 18 years old, still in my work apron, feet aching, $340 in my pocket. I said sorry to a man who had just thrown my glass at a wall because that was the path of least resistance, and I needed another few weeks in that house. But I wasn't sorry. I was paying attention. The thing I'd tell anyone in a version of that situation is the same thing Danny said back to me, like it explained everything. Pay attention, not to the surface of things, the charm, the explanations, the apologies that never quite land, to the underneath, to who defers to whom, to who goes quiet and why, to what happens when you say no. I live in Riverside now. I'm in my 2nd year of community college studying accounting. I like the precision of it, the way the numbers either reconcile or they don't. I see my dad most weekends. I see Mom and Danny about once a month, and Danny calls me more than that. He's 13 now, nearly 14, and he's loud and opinionated, and he has a lot of feelings about his school's lunch policy and his friend group's internal politics, and I love it. I love every word of it. Mom is doing okay. That's the truest way I know to say it. She's not back to who she was before Marcus, but I'm not sure that version of her is coming back exactly, and maybe that's not the right goal anyway. She's more careful now, more inward. She dates, a little. She mentioned someone from her office a few months ago, someone she's taking slowly. I hope it's good for her. I hope she lets herself have something real. What I lost, underneath all the winning, was the version of my mother I'd had before, the one who was just Mom, before she needed to defend him, before she learned to explain away the things he did to her son, before the $8,000. That woman is still there. I can see her. But she's layered over now like something has been written on top of her. Maybe that fades. Maybe it doesn't. I said sorry to Marcus in our kitchen and I meant none of it. But there is one real apology I've carried since then. It's for Danny. For every month before the glass night when I saw what was happening to him and I managed around it instead of ending it. For every dinner I sat through and said nothing. He was 12. He was my little brother. He deserved better than my patience. He's told me he doesn't blame me. I believe him, but I still carry it. The glass is long gone. The wall was repainted. The house doesn't have the silence in it anymore. The particular held breath quiet of a home organized around someone's moods. Danny talks through dinner now. That's the whole story, in a way. That's what I was protecting. I had $340 and 3 weeks and a woman in Orange County who'd been waiting 8 months for an address. That was enough.